I will call the Planning Commission of April 16th, 2025 to order. Madam Secretary, can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner McPhail?
Present.
Commissioner Mead?
Me, here.
Vice Chair Lee?
Present.
Commissioner Bedard?
Here.
Chair Malakoff?
Present.
Let the record show all commissioners are here.
Now, can we all please stand, if you can, for the Pledge of Allegiance to our great country? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, on confirmation of the agenda, we've had a request to move our number 3 from our esteemed building official to number 1. And if there's no disagreement on that, we will have that as our first item. I don't see any disagreement, and we'll move number 3 up to number 1. Public comments. The public is invited to address the Planning Commission on any matter not on the agenda. If you wish to speak on the agenda item, please wait to be recognized under that item. Except for special circumstances, the Brown Act prohibits the Planning Commission or staff from responding or taking action on any comments made by the public unless it pertains to an item that appears on the agenda. All speakers should give their name and city of residence. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody online or anything like that?
We don't have any members of the public in the audience, just our building officials, so
Okay.
there's no public comments.
Then we can move on to approval of minutes. Approval of the March 5th, 2025 meeting minutes. Do we have a motion and a second?
Motion to approve.
And a second?
I'll second.
Do we have a second?
Mr. Bedard.
1B will be the special meeting minutes for the March 13th.
Sorry, Chair, excuse me, sorry, just 1 second, so I can read that into the record. Let the record show a motion was made by Vice Chair Lee, seconded by Commissioner Bedard. Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Item 1B is approval of the special meeting minutes for March 13th, March 15th morning, and March 15th in the afternoon, and March 16th. Are there any requests from the public to speak on this item?
We have no one in the audience wishing to speak.
Do we have a motion and a second?
Chair,
Vice
I
Chair,
have-
if I may, for the record, we do have some changes to those minutes, if I could read those in. All right, so for the March 13th, 2025 minutes, the end time will be corrected to read 6:45 p.m. The March 15th morning minutes will be corrected to a 10 a.m. end time. March 15th, 2025 afternoon minutes, the start time will be corrected to 10:30 a.m. and the end time will be changed to approximately 11:30 a.m. And finally, the March 16th, 2025 minutes will show the end time approximately 11 a.m.
With that, incorporating those changes into...
Chair.
By reference?
Sorry, I have one other minor amendment. I was not present on March 15th at the 9 a.m. meeting.
I'm sorry, which date, Vice Chair?
March 15th, 9 a.m.
Okay. That will be corrected in those minutes for approval.
Thank you.
Okay, and the motion will include those corrections by both the Secretary and Commissioner Lee by reference. And do we have a motion to approve with those changes?
I'll move.
And a second?
Second. Second.
Okay, let the record show the motion was made by Vice Chair Lee and seconded by Commissioner McPhail to approve the special meeting minutes with the noted corrections for the record.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We're going to move on to item 2C, and we're very lucky tonight to have Jeremy Frey is our Chief Building Official to make a presentation on the functions of our Building and Safety Department, and we look forward to seeing his presentation. Thank you for coming tonight.
Sure, you're very welcome. Commissioners, my name is Jeremy Fry, Chief Building Official here for Cathedral City. What I'm going to present today is kind of a synopsis, a snapshot of what the Building and Safety Department does, what our overall function is, the things we look at in the office, permitting in the field, inspection-wise, getting a project from start to finish. So I'm not going to read word for word, but I believe you do have the presentation in front of you. The Building and Safety, our primary function is to observe, assess, document, and then educate. Permit techs are our first point of contact. They're the ones who are receiving the applications, receiving the submittals, construction documents, and any pertinent information that comes with that. Their job is crucial to the point where their quality control at the very beginning of a project, they're going to catch documentation that's whether it's missing, whether it's missing information on the application, or if it's just they're missing pages in construction documents, the plans, the blueprints. From that, when they catch those issues, if any, they'll kick them back, and the project has not technically started yet. Once we receive a complete submittal, that's when the actual permit application date begins. To that aspect, that it really minimizes delays in the project moving forward, because those types of things, it gets halfway through a project, they can affect the project, whether it's an address, a false address, a scope of work, what's being done on the project itself. So those are the quality control up front is crucial to that aspect. Once the permit techs approve the project, when they deem it complete, the application, it moves forward into a plan review process. The plan review process is, we have an in-house plan checker. What he does is he'll take the project, review the plans, review the documentation, make sure it's meeting the code minimum and the standards to the state and local jurisdiction, our municipal code. Once he approves that approves the actual the permit itself, and it's ready to start construction. So from that aspect, the construction begins, inspections start whenever an inspection is requested. So, we can say if it's a new single-family dwelling, from the ground up, we have theoretically where there's nine inspections from start to finish. There are times we can go back if something's not ready or if something fails. The inspector out in the field, what we call it's kind of the inspector's creed. It's you observe and you document. So in that aspect, from start to finish on a project, the inspector theoretically we hope can take it from start to finish as the inspector of record. They review the documentation, anything inspection-wise from structural to what we call the MEPs is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, energy requirements, accessibility requirements, which most people know is ADA, which we have a slide later on that will address ADA and accessibility requirements in the code. And then when I say educate, it's to the point where whether it's an inspector or a permit technician, myself, or a plans examiner, if someone doesn't understand the code, it's kind of like the law. There's always the letter of the law, and then there's the intent. For us, there's the letter of the code, and then there's interpretation. We need to be able to explain that to the applicant, the contractor, the homeowner, whoever it may be. And that's a big part of the inspector's job as well as everybody else, is being able to elaborate that so they understand it. Take it out of code speak and put it into normal person so they can understand it. And then lastly, investigation and compliance. That can range anything from a fire to a structure, what we call vehicle versus building, which, we'll get those, probably a handful of those every year. Natural disasters, flooding, like we had in August of 2023. Those are the types of things when we talk about we go out and investigate or search for compliance. We'll also work hand in hand with the code compliance department. If they're finding something or receiving complaints of structures that are uninhabitable from, poor conditions, whether it's lack of water, lack of heat, lack of electricity, we'll go out and assist the code enforcement department. We'll make observations, we'll document, and then we'll make an assessment to move forward with that building. Recently, in the last year, we've gone 100% digital, what we call the CSS portal, which is the customer self-service portal. Here you can pretty much do anything licensing-wise, permitting-wise, throughout City Hall. Building and safety, planning, we are all digital. Fire is digital. So if you need a water heater permit, 11:30 at night, and you're sitting there and you forget the water heater is going to be installed tomorrow morning, you can go online, you can scan it, you can click the submit button, you can go on the Cathedral City app. You can have a permit within 24 hours. We have expedited permits. We have, I believe, 7 of them. So water heaters, HVAC changeouts, if you're doing a sewer connection, a residential re-roof, those are called expedited permits, what we refer to as you can pretty much get those within 24 hours. It's a few clicks. We go through the application process. Those will be submitted and approved as long as it's within a business day. Sometimes you might have them in 10 minutes, depending on the workload for the permit techs and the inspectors. Once we get the application submitted online, the permit techs will go through, do their quality control, as I was speaking on earlier in the previous slide. They'll push it into the plan review process. Everything can be tracked digitally on the portal. So each applicant will have their own portal, their login. They'll go to their portal and it will show all of their work that they have from anywhere from submitted all the way through, final projects. So they track their inspections, they track their any corrections, any questions they have, if there's fees due, you name it, it's on there. Okay. So what we enforce and why? Obviously the California building codes consist of the non-residential commercial codes, residential building codes, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, green, and energy codes. All of those in California have their own code books. The International Code Council, the ICC, they write the model codes. And then what we call the legacy. Some states have their own codes. They base their codes off of the legacy codes. California, we have our own standards. We have our own books for each discipline. Disability accommodations, most commonly known as ADA or accessibility. Those codes are in, the California Building Code 11A and 11B. Those are chapters that addresses accommodations for public housing as well as public buildings. We'll address that a little bit in the next coming slides. Solar energy requirements, that'll be in the energy code. And make a quick note of this. Commissioner Malikoff requested a few of these specific subjects that we touch base on, and this is one of them, as well as the accessibility and the green standards. The green standards will also address EV charging and the requirements for EV charging stations for new construction. All right. All right. Now let's get into the weeds. So first slide you'll see is the requirements for what we call accessibility. Chapter 11B, there's a lot of crossover from 11A to 11B, but the most commonly that we're always using and the most complaints we get is parking. And that is where accessibility starts. So what we call site arrival. So if you look at the very top, at least one accessible route shall connect accessible buildings, accessible facilities, accessible elements, and accessible spaces that are on the same site. So the minute you cross into a parking lot, whether it's a private parking lot or public, that's when the building code kicks in. So if you're walking down a sidewalk along a street, that's going to be more on the engineering public works side. But as long as we have a path of travel from the public to the accessible entrance of the building, that's what we're looking at. And then it goes through parking. It goes through what's called your accessible route. So when you're looking at the parking slide to the right, there's minimum requirements on width, length, and then how many spaces that is required. So you have a van accessible space, you have an accessible aisle, and then you'll have a standard accessible parking space. So each one of those has its own numbers. I can get more into detail on that. It's probably fall asleep if I keep going on that. But the minimum width for a van space is 12 feet. The minimum access aisle is 5 feet. And then the standard accessible car space is 9 feet. Each one of those is 18 feet long or 18 feet deep. The required parking itself, you need one accessible space for every 25 standard parking spaces. So if you walk into a parking lot, and I know everybody when you leave, you're going to pull into a parking lot and start counting and say, well, they got one and they got two. Sometimes businesses and parking lots, or at least owners of complexes, they'll go above and beyond. They'll put 2 or 3, when really one is only required. One van accessible parking spot for every 6 standard accessible parking spots. So when you see a van, you'll probably see a standard next to it. If a van's by itself, it's because they're just putting the van in. The van will take care of the single spot itself and the van. So there's a lot of interpretation in there, but if you only see a van parking spot, it's because they have the space and they put it in there. If you do have complaints, or if we do need to field complaints, if someone, Commissioner Malakoff earlier said there's possibly tripping hazards throughout the streets or walking in the buildings. On our city website, under the building and safety page, there is a link that says forms online. The very first link is called, it's ADA complaint form. What that will do is the reporting party will fill that out, and they can either send it directly to the building email, they can send it to myself, or you can go onto the city's app or the website where it says contact us. Any way that you need to communicate with us will get to us. And then if it's actually a building issue or accessibility feature that was maybe removed, we will go out and address that with the property owner or the manager. All right, next discipline would be energy, so Title 24. So there's certain requirements on buildings, both residential and non-residential. I try to keep it as simple as possible and keep it consistent with the code without having to go into extreme detail. But the residential requirements, and there, you see the asterisk up there. If a new project, and this is all new construction, if a new project comes in and if they are proposing solar on their project, none of this matters. If they don't propose solar, all of this matters. That's the easiest way I can explain it. So on a single family or 2-family dwelling, if they're not proposing a solar system, they have to provide what's called a 250 square foot designated rooftop solar zone. And what that is 250 square feet uninterrupted. No vents, no skylights, no really anything coming through it. It's got to be flat, it's got to be blank roof for them to actually put a solar system in the future. Okay? ESS ready, that's battery backup, or at least energy storage system. A lot of people are getting those. The solar companies are giving them away like hotcakes because the state is actually providing very high, I guess it would be a high, very good incentive for battery systems. like they were for solar panels 5 to 10 years ago. Now the batteries are, it's the hot ticket item. So battery-ready system on a brand new build construction, it's required you have at least a 1-inch conduit or a raceway, and to be able to provide a 60 amp breaker for that battery system. Also a 225 amp, what's called a 225 amp rated main service panel, okay? So what that's gonna do is it's gonna be a little higher than a normal 200 amp panel on a new home. It's gonna give you a little extra room so you can put that breaker in there. That's the easiest way I can explain that, if that makes sense to you guys. Okay? Non-residential requirements, it's the same. If they don't propose solar, an ESS system is not required. So battery systems are not required in non-residential. However, multifamily and commercial, they need to provide a 250 square foot solar zone if they do not provide or at least propose solar. Any structure included in the project that's within 250 feet of the main building should have solar zone on it. So let's say you've got a 10,000 square foot building going up. If they have parking structures, shaded structures, within 250 feet of that building, those parking structures need to provide at least 250 square feet of openness so they can build solar in the future. Solar zone minimum 15% of total roof area. So on that 10,000 square foot building, they need to provide 15% of that total square footage of that building. If they can't get 15% on that building because there's obstructions everywhere, they need to put it on those accessory structures, so the parking structure. If they had, any type of, let's say, cooling structures or anything that has to do with that main building in that project scope, they need to be able to provide that 250 square feet there. California Green Building Standards. So the EV charging and the requirements is probably one of the most gray areas when it comes to new construction. There's 3 basic categories. There's EV capable, there's EV ready, and there's EV supply equipment. EV capable is the most standard requirement for any new construction. They need to provide or show us that there's room in the main service panel or a sub panel, and they need to provide a 1-inch conduit going to somewhere where a vehicle may be. So let's say I'm the main service panel and there's 5 parking spots, okay? One of those parking spots needs to be provided EV capable, all right? So what they'll do is they'll run a 1-inch conduit from me to you, and they'll put a box there, and that's it. They're good. That's EV capable. EV ready is the same thing I just said, as well as running the wire and running the actual, what's called a box or the fixture. So a plug, that needs to be in. That's the actual EV ready. EV vehicle supply equipment is ready to go. So you can drive up, you can plug in, and you're ready, you're charging. So those are the 3 aspects to keep in mind as we go to the next slide when the requirements are EV capable, EV ready, and EV supply equipment. Any questions before I go to the next slide?
Hold it to the end.
Okay, sure. So the requirements for single and 2-family dwellings with an attached garage, that's the kicker. They need to install a 1-inch conduit connecting main panel to what's called a listed box. So anything that's recognized in the electrical code. So you'll see if you built a new house or if you've bought in a house within the last probably 15 years, in your garage, you're going to see a plug or a blank plug that's got conduit running from there all the way to the panel. There's going to be a little sticker on it too. It'll say EV. Okay, that's EV capable. And that is going to be capable of supporting a 40 amp outlet. So that's going to be blank space in the main service panel. There is an exception, and 40 amp is not required to be dedicated in close proximity to a proposed EV charger. So if there is already one there, or let's say you got a 3-car garage, if there's one in the 2-car garage, you don't need to put a third one in there. Multifamily and hotels. Projects with greater than 20 dwelling units, so more than 20 rooms, 10% of the total parking spaces shall be EV capable. And the breaker at the electrical panel labeled EV capable. 25% of total parking spaces shall be EV ready. So if you have 100 parking spaces, 25 of those need to be EV ready. And 5% of the total parking spaces shall be EV supply equipment. So let's say if we're building a new hotel or apartment complex, if there's 100 spaces, 5 of those are going to be ready to go. You'll be able to pull up at the end of the project, plug your car in, and you're charging. Projects with less than 20 dwelling units, 10% of total parking spaces shall be EV capable. The exception is equal number of level 2 charging stations are installed. So level 2 means that's kind of your standard vehicle charging station. As long as they have 2 of those installed, that stuff doesn't matter. 10% does not matter. And then 25% of total parking spaces shall be EV ready. So the green building standards for what we call non-residential, so commercial projects. Along Perez Road, all the commercial buildings are industrial. This chart here, it's pretty self-explanatory. Gives you the total number of parking spaces that they're proposing, the number of EV capable spaces required, and the number of EV capable spaces if the EV supply equipment is not installed. Really quick on the right, medium heavy duty charging for warehouses, grocery, and retail. So I'll use the big guys down the street. It starts with A and ends with Amazon. That's heavy, that's medium heavy duty. So when they're charging their trucks and their vans, that's a medium heavy duty charge, okay? So electrical systems must meet the minimum power requirements. What happens is when you have that many vehicles, they need to propose to us that project is capable of maintaining charging that many vehicles at one time, okay? And then medium heavy duty, the quick definition equals trucks, vans, buses greater than 10,000 pounds. So most of them are delivery vehicles, commercial semis. So the one exception to all of this is if the local authority determines there's no power available from the utility cannot provide enough power, extra utility upgrades needed for compliance would significantly increase the price of the project, we can step in and say, all right, propose to us what you can do. So that's where we have the jurisdiction of stepping in and saying, for instance, IID had an issue with a couple of projects in the East Valley. There were times where they would have to step in and say, we can't do it. We can't supply the power to put that many EV charging stations on this project. Okay.
A question about
Yeah.
if the compliance would significantly increase construction costs, does that become a discretionary thing at the city level? Is it a planning commission? Is it a city council? Who's making that determination that it's too expensive?
Typical, it will start with me.
Okay.
It'll start with me and then it'll climb up the ladder. Normally, when they submit their project to the utility will tell them right off the bat, yep, no problem. They put us in there as not a middleman, but discretion. So, the project will come to us, it'll also go to the utility. They'll come to us and say, hey, these requirements are there. We will not be able to build a project because of the price that it's going to cost us. We do have the authority to say, okay, propose to us what you think you can do, and then we'll review it from there.
Okay.
Question. So,
Are you done now?
I believe there's the next slide is questions. So we're done with the actual presentation. So it does drum up some questions. So,
Cool.
Absolutely.
so back on the slide you just had, was any of that would this be only new construction, or did any of this have to go, say, on, I forget the name of the project, on Date Palm, where the Mega Dollar Store is, and Planet Fitness, and those types of things that are happening there, and there's a new company coming in, and they're repaving and painting, which is wonderful, but did any of this apply to that, or is it only new construction?
It is only new construction,
It's only new.
yes. When they, let's say they come in and they want to install EV charging, this will apply.
But they have to want to, which is a cost that they're going to want to pay. 'Cause I'm just curious, because that's a very large parking lot with lots of businesses, and there are no EV. And I believe the lots are divided up. It looks like it's one big complex, but
Sure.
I believe the lots are divided up. You'll be able to tell me. And there's not a whole lot of handicap, or disabled, sorry. There's not a lot of disabled parking places in that center.
Sure. So to answer your first question, it is only new construction.
Okay.
So if they do plan on coming in and they want to add EV charging stations, this will kick in.
Right, so even though they're pulling permits, they're putting in landscaping, they're redoing all the tarmac and all that type of stuff, that doesn't trigger a,
That is correct.
all right, that's a bummer.
So, and then to answer your, you briefly mentioned ADA or handicap parking. That does trigger. When they come in and they bring in the new business proposal, luckily, planning department as well as building and engineering, we all work very closely with that. And if there is a refresh needed, then there is a certain amount of parking that they'll need to provide, especially if they're doing some tenant improvements.
Oh, that's great, because there is not very much there, so that's awesome.
Commissioner McPhail?
Okay. Well, first of all, thanks very much for providing the presentation in advance.
You're welcome.
Which is something I have mentioned in the past, which we don't get very often. So it's nice to see the presentation so we can maybe ask some useful questions, which you've already had. I guess I might just ask about the slide that's on the screen right now, actually. Where, you know, for example, if we look at 26 to 50 spaces, they're meant to have 8 capable spaces, which simply means one fine day there could be something installed, but there's nothing actually there beyond the power supply.
That is correct. Correct.
And then if they're proposing 26 to 50, 2 of those spaces should have equipment,
Shall have.
That's
So
good.
they will be required that they put in electrical vehicle supply equipment. So those 2 spaces, when that project is complete, you will see 2 charging stations. The one thing that it's hard to explain sometimes is when we say charging stations, it doesn't necessarily need to be a big Tesla Powerwall box that, you know, is freestanding in the middle of the parking lot. It can be just a small stand, which you can pull in and just charge it. Let's say the difference between, I don't have an electric vehicle, but from what I've observed, the difference between, let's say, maybe a Prius or a Volt, a Chevy Volt, what it's literally, it's a plug. You know, you can plug your car into an outlet in the wall. It's a little different than normal compared to what's the Tesla superchargers, which is a freestanding box with a giant plug on it. So those are, it's EV capable. That's an EV charging station. There's different magnitudes to it.
Okay. You probably know that you'll probably have to get ready for some major education to staff in terms of the permitting process and how that relates to zoning code, because we're about to do our
Sure.
updates. That's going to be a big educational exercise for the staff, I'm sure. You mentioned, I think, earlier on in the presentation about how there are 9 inspections that are part of the menu things that you have to do. Are they all state requirements or a mixture of local and state requirements that we have?
So the easiest way to explain that is and when I say 9 inspections, I always use a single-family dwelling, a brand-new house. So from start to finish, there's 9 required inspections. Different jurisdictions might add an inspection in there sooner or later. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a ground plumbing inspection. You're going to have a footings and foundation inspection. Then you can start going vertical. Then you'll have what's called a roof nail inspection. you'll have what we call a sheet and shear or an okay to wrap. So when you see a house getting ready to be what's called dried in, it's the lath and the paper, and they're getting ready to stucco it, that's one inspection. Once that's done, what we have is what's called a combo inspection. That's your framing, electrical, mechanical, plumbing. That's a milestone inspection. We're giving them the okay to cover everything up on the inside of the house and insulate. Then there's an installation inspection, a drywall inspection, and then a building final.
Back to the solar for a second.
Sure.
Pardon me, Commissioner McPhail, I'm so sorry. Can we speak into the
Oh,
mic just
sorry.
a little more?
I'm about 2 centimeters away from it, sorry. The requirements and the mandatory measures you showed also talked about how the lack of a power supply or coming from the utility would put that all out. You know, that someone determines, you determine, the utility determines that we can't supply power. So those requirements are moot then, it doesn't matter.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Normally, if it gets to that point, I haven't been to that. I haven't had to make that decision yet. It hasn't gotten to my desk. It has been made before it's gotten to me. But in this case, what we do is we try to get the most out of them as we can. So let's say if they needed 20 and 20 EV charging stations or EV supply equipment, and really their budget would only allow them to put in 5, we would work with them. That is the last case scenario. That's the easiest way I can explain.
Do you have a sense from your experience how often that is an issue for us, that there's no power, we can't do this?
No.
Hasn't come up?
No, sir.
Yeah, that's good to know.
It does happen, though, on the other side of the valley.
Yeah.
With Imperial Irrigation District, quite a bit. They ask people to put in generators, and they don't have the capacity that we do, and it's a real issue. But we're lucky we don't have that.
So the various I'll just stick to EV charging for a moment because I am an EV car owner. You've gone through the definitions and the mandatory measures that we have. Are these the sorts of things, this is maybe for our planning staff, are these the sorts of requirements and regulations that could be looked at as part of our zoning code update to see if there's anything that could be improved and modified for the future?
So I think it could be discussed. I just would not, these requirements are of the building code. The building codes get updated every 3 years.
Right.
And so there's no, if there was a need for redundancy, I could see that, but I'm not sure at this point that there would be a need for redundancy since it's covered through building and safety.
Gotcha. Okay, I think I'm...
Something else to think about is you have the zoning code, but you also have local amendments to the building code. And that's a possibility as well. So if the city wanted to set a stronger standard than what the state requires, to set a higher minimum, that is something you can do through local amendments to the building code. So right now, this year, we're going to go through an adoption for the 2025 California Building Code. That's a possibility. So I think if there is a desire, and this is a policy direction that the city wants to undertake, we do have that authority to express that through the adoption of the building code. And at least in that sense, you're not creating a potential conflict between the zoning code and the building code.
Yeah, I know it's a tightrope between letting development happen plus the sort of things we would like to see, but I do think EV charging is something that we should be conscious of as we go forward because it is something of a growth industry, and from personal experience, I go down to the Palm Desert Target all the time to do my charging. It would be nicer we had something local to do and give Cathedral City some sense when I do it as well. So anyway,
On that aspect, Commissioner McPhail, is you will see that, and you see it more often in big box stores, the companies that have the capital to do that. I call it they're just doing their due diligence without having to do any work or bringing in new construction. They'll just go in and they'll have the money to do that. Let's go out and put 10 charging stations in. It's because they have the money to do it. And they have the space and the infrastructure capability to do that.
Yeah. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Just a little bit of information for another EV owner here. So the thing you were struggling for, the difference between those great big chargers and the EVSE ones. EVSE would be a level 2, and the big one is a level 3.
Right.
So
Thank you.
it's okay. I wanted to go back a minute partly to education and also to how residents deal with permits and so on. I'm wondering whose responsibility is, if I'm employing a contractor, a licensed contractor, is it their responsibility to get the permits and do what is appropriate? Do I have to check with the city to find out if I need permits? Who's the onus on in that situation?
So it's actually, that's a two-part question. Ultimately, it is your call as the homeowner. You can pull the permit as what we call owner-builder, okay? When you do that, all liability lands on you as the homeowner. If you want the licensed contractor to pull the permits, they can as well. Typically what happens is if, let's say you pull the permit and it's owner-builder, what we require is, it's just, there's a couple signature boxes saying that you are obtaining full liability for that project, whether it be a basic, water heater change out, or if you're building an ADU and remodeling your entire house, you can do that. From the contractor standpoint, I have always recommended to have the contractor pull the actual permits themselves. It's not saying that pulling an owner-builder is a bad thing. The problem or the issue that I've seen my entire career is the owner-builder wants to pull the permit because it'll save them a little bit of money. And the issue with that is if you've never done it before, or let's say you're not, a lot of times they'll pull a permit owner-builder and they're a contractor themselves. They know the process. They know how it works. The issue is if they pull an owner-builder and they don't know, it's not that there might be issues, there will be issues, and it delays the project. So what it is it's more of a setting the standard and giving them their education up front, just telling them, hey, you're more than welcome to do it. We will help you as much as we can, but there are issues that can arise if you've never done it before.
Right, but I want to go a little bit different to that and say, so, my water heater's gone out, so I need to get a new water heater. So I call a plumber that I trust, who's a licensed contractor, and I say, oh, I need to get a new heater as quickly as possible. And then I say, do we need a permit? And he says, no. How do I know? What tells me, the homeowner, that I should have said, you damn well do need a permit, so go get me one?
Yeah. To answer that directly, yes, you do need a permit to change out a water heater. Think of it this way, any structural infrastructure to, let's just say, a house, if you're altering it, if you're changing out a water heater, if you're changing out an air conditioning unit, a heater unit, or if you're changing out the piping from that unit to the rest of the fixtures in the house, yes, it needs a permit. If you're changing out light bulbs in your house, or if you're just switching out a light switch, you don't need a permit for that. That's considered maintenance. And the easiest way I could say is you have the easiest and most efficient way to ask that question. You can just come directly to us. And I tell that, I get calls from residents from different cities, myself as well as the rest of the building team, because a resident from a different city wants a standpoint from another city building department, just to make sure that the city they live in is telling the truth. So it happens a lot. But yes, to answer your question, if you're altering any part of the house that doesn't have to do with, if it's not flooring, cabinets, countertops, paint, those things, they don't require permits. If you're rearranging the layout to your house, moving walls, yes.
I actually had an experience last week with an electrician who I've used for years, and he's licensed and trustworthy, and I had him come over to do some work, and I said, I guess we're going to need a permit. And he said, no, because of the age of your property and when this was done. So he pulled out the code and actually showed me, which was very very good of him to do that.
Sure.
So anyway, but I just think a lot of homeowners don't understand this. So I'm wondering, is there any sort of educational program like
Yes, we've actually had discussions, and this is one of the reasons why I came to the city, because being in the valley, most of the cities are small. Cathedral City is one of the smaller ones as well, and the interaction, public interaction, and the interface with the residents themselves, I enjoy that part of it. So we have that, and I think over the last year and a half, the staff that we've built, the team that we've built, is very conducive and open to helping the residents instead of, whether it's outside of the valley or any other cities, a lot of them don't give you that personal face-to-face. So, from that standpoint, we've talked about putting on maybe workshops on what requires a permit, the basics, like you're asking, Commissioner Lee. Do I need a permit to change out my water heater? Do I need a permit to fix my clean out in the front of the house because the plumbing's backing up? Those are the types of things that we definitely can put together workshops. What we've actually talked about is doing pre-recorded videos for YouTube and posting them on the site. So those are just those are the easy and efficient ways of addressing those types of topics.
To expand on that idea, one of the subjects that we discussed actually was accessory dwelling units and trying to break down some of the barriers to accessory
Would you
dwelling
speak
units.
into your microphone?
Trying to do what I can. Be louder. In other jurisdictions, we did deck building workshops or basement building workshops, and a lot of this was geared at sort of the do-it-yourself homeowner, trying to encourage them to get permits and to show them that you, in fact, can do this work. We're not building decks or basements here in Cathedral City, but I think we can do more to engage the community, to talk about the permitting process, the reason why someone should get a permit. This is to protect your interests, to protect the future owner's interests, and we can use that to enhance communication and to break down barriers on certain permit types.
I imagine Ryan would be willing to help in that area, so he's a good resource. Inspections. So since I do collect a number of permits, particularly in the last year, we've had good responses on inspections, but I used to hear a lot of feedback from people, particularly developers, who say, it takes weeks to get inspections done, whatever. So I understand actually that we've improved that a lot. I just want to know how we're doing in terms of inspections now on projects.
Sure. The easiest way to answer that question is right now we're at a 24-hour turnaround. So we're at next business day. Taking the exception that we don't do inspections on Fridays. We work the 4-10 schedule, so Monday through Thursday. The inspectors are out in the field between 7:30 and 8 a.m. and they're back in the office by 4. That's about 2 hours longer than most other jurisdictions have inspectors out in the field. So that allows us to put about another 4 to 5 inspections on top of that day's run. So to answer your question, yes, that was one of the roadblocks that I saw right away when I started with Cathedral City. And I mean, credit to our inspectors and our permit staff, as well as our plans examiner, for giving me the input on why that was happening. Oh. I had my own input, and I had my own observations, but utilizing them to tell me what was going on, or at least what they thought was going on. And we did get a lot of feedback from the development community. I've been in the Valley for about 24 years now, as I've been on the other side, on the private side, and have run into those issues with other jurisdictions. So right now we are at a 24-hour turnaround.
Something
Thanks.
I would add to that as well, and this is to give Jeremy some credit. Jeremy advocated for a second full-time building inspector. Right now, we have a full-time staff building inspector and a contract building inspector. We have sustained demand for building inspections, and in order for us to continue to meet that 24-hour turnaround for inspections, we needed to staff that position. So through the budgeting process that has been presented to City Council and as part of the City Manager's recommended budget, we will be converting a vacant FTE into a second full-time staffed building inspector position. So we'll have 2 full-time building inspectors, and as Jeremy said, they're out all day, Monday through Thursday, with a full list of stops.
Okay. And last question, which is back to solar again, but roof solar. Your slide for where there is no solar planned, I thought it was required now for all new buildings.
So the 2019 code required it. 2022 code changed. 2025 code's probably going to go back. I have not seen it yet. I will not have eyes on that until July. But as often as the energy code changes, they literally, and when I say this, I'm not exaggerating, it changes. They have amendments and erratas every 6 months. So it's constantly changing. And that is going back to, it's California. It's the legacy code. California, it's from the top down. So it comes from the state level, the Department of Energy, and it trickles down to us. So keeping up with that is difficult, but you're right. It did in the last code cycle. It was required.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I had no idea it changed. I'll just add another informational note, which is that they talk about 40 amp circuits for home chargers. Level 2 chargers typically demand either 50 or 60 amp now. So 40 amp is giving you quite low response on the level 2 charger. So hopefully they'll increase that too.
You are correct. Yeah, they're keeping it at a level where, I shouldn't say level. They're keeping it at a demand where it's not going to increase the cost of putting in the actual electrical equipment itself. That's the, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Mead.
Just 2 quick questions, actually. One, who's responsible for the maintenance of the EV station? So say in a commercial area, is it the commercial landlord who's responsible for making sure that they're working, or?
That is correct, yes. And that depends on, the contract, the agreement between the owner or the property manager and the installer, or they could have a separate contract with a third party that maintains.
Because sometimes they're outsourced, like they're kind of leased.
Yes,
right?
that
They don't
is
have to be
correct.
owned by the property. Okay. And then I love Danny's idea about educating people, because we owned a condo, but we never had a freestanding house, and so permits were really never something I thought about.
Sure.
And I'm sure a lot of people who are moving out here, kind of same situation. I see a lot of people asking about property taxes, so I think that's kind of common. I know the city sends out that booklet twice a year, and I'm always advocating for putting more in that booklet. But it goes to every house, right? It has a lot of great information, and maybe one page about, if you could come up with an acronym for the major things that need a permit, that we could all remember an acronym. I love acronyms, maybe because my parents were teachers. And then I was thinking, I know when people move in, they have to activate electric, right? They have to, basically there's an activation of electricity in the house. I don't know if there's any way to get information about when that happens, because you could then send out something automatically. Because when people move in, a lot of times they're going to do remodeling, and they may not know, I need to pull a permit to, swap out this or replace the water heater or whatever. So just 2 suggestions, but I love the idea of educating people more, because I'm sure people have no idea. That for little things, like to me, replacing a water heater seems like something that would be really not a big deal.
You and me
never
both.
think. What?
You and me both.
Yeah. So you're doing a great job, and thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy, for a great presentation. Just a few questions. So going back to is a trip hazard actually a building issue? Like if they have a power cord running across a walkway, or they have a step that's not painted or illuminated in a way that people would see it? So is that actually a building issue?
It's a loaded question. Let's put it to you this way. If it is in the path of egress, that's the word we use. If it's an egress path, it can be a building issue. A lot of times it's just a maintenance thing that back to the word using educated. They just don't know. If they don't know, they're not going to know unless someone, usually it's a reactionary visit because something happens. Someone trips on something and we go out there and say, okay. The problem is you can't make someone do something if they're not pulling permits for something. If they take away an accessible feature, let's say there's a stairway up to a front door to a Target, and that stairway is their main path of accessible egress. If they take a handrail out, we can go out there and we can actually cite them and we can require them to put that handrail back in. If they take out a door, that's part of their main egress or accessible path of travel, ADA. We can go in there, we can cite them, and we can require them to put that back in there.
So it's a real gray area for the trip hazards if they're not pulling a permit. And then when somebody makes these kinds of reports, is it confidential? The person's not going to find out who did it, right?
It depends. It's if someone goes onto the app or the city's website and says, this is Rich Malakoff, and I'm putting in a notification that something's going on at this address, it comes directly to us. So we will file it, and it'll stay in the city's records. And if you can submit it anonymously as well.
But the person the party that you're reporting doesn't find out who did it.
Not if you don't want them to.
Okay. And so if you find that there's like a wall that's unstable, a wing wall or a column or a pillar.
Pilaster, pillar?
Pilaster, thank you. Get that out. I kept on thinking of, never mind. Pilaster, now that would be an issue where even though they're not pulling a permit, they would have to fix it, or you could red card them.
It could be a life safety or a health issue, yes. If it comes down to something like that, red tagging it's a very, very, very strict and strong action that we take on buildings. I can go into that for about 10 seconds if you want me to, but in this case, if you walk into some place and you say, that wall doesn't look sturdy, and you walk up to it and push it, and then yeah, you can tell us, absolutely.
I often go into places of business and I'll see like beer crates stacked in front of a fire door. Is that you or fire?
Both. Both of us can address that.
So it can be reported to building also?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say Target or Stater Brothers is adding 5,000 square foot to the rear of the building. When Commissioner Bedard was talking about, the existing businesses needing to put the EV facilities in, at what threshold does an addition require them to install the EV facilities?
When they're adding usable space. It can be 10 square feet.
So if our Target enclosed the garden center, that would be an addition, and then they'd have to bring it up to code for the EV.
If they're turning it into the same use and occupancy of the building itself, so they're enclosing 10,000 square feet as an assembly area or a mercantile like the rest of the building, yes.
Yeah, the garden center now is just like a covered patio.
Sure. Yep.
So if they put 4 walls around it, and there's no minimum, it's just any addition?
In non-residential or commercial, there is no minimums.
That's interesting. So that's also a way for people to be brought up to code. The last issue I have, which in some building departments, they issue grading permits. I don't think we do here. Do you?
We do not.
Okay, and then
Engineering issues that, building and safety, we do not.
if I can veer just to a grading permit issue. So, if we have mitigation measures that we approve through a mitigated negative declaration for monitors for archaeology or biology, does engineering come back to planning and say, "Oh, what do we do with this?" So that they don't just not do it?
So yes, there's a lot of communication and coordination through the departments, including building and engineering and fire and planning. So when grading permits come into the engineering department, a couple of things happen. Our engineering department will ask us for the signed conditions of approval so that they have a signed set that they can refer to. They also advise planning department that grading plans are in plan review so that we can also review it and comment to catch those mitigation measures that are triggered at grading as opposed to building.
Does the grading plan actually get circulated to the planning department so that you can get back to engineering? Because typically those kinds of things aren't the top of their list. No offense taken to anybody particularly.
Yes.
So you would be able to say, oh, they need to contact the tribe and get a tribal monitor out here before you break any ground.
Yeah, yes, and a recent example is Nirvana Estates, right? So they got a rough grading permit, but that rough grading permit had conditions on it that they had to provide the tribal contract for monitoring. They had to do the burrowing owl, the nesting survey. So all those things had to be done before they could actually start doing rough grading. And we kept in constant contact with the developer, and they did provide all those things before they started rough grading. Yeah.
So you interact primarily with the planners here at Planning Commission, and I would say that for the entitlement process, your planners act effectively as the project manager. They're coordinating the review process. Many others are still involved. Engineering is involved, building is involved, although they have a secondary role. In a post-entitlement process, engineering really takes that lead role where they're acting as the project managers and they're coordinating among the review agencies. And then when it gets to a building permit, Jeremy's team is acting in that lead role, and others are still involved in that secondary or referral role. It's very much coordinated, and we use our internal development services committee meeting to coordinate those various moving parts. But
That's good to hear. I feel a lot better about those mitigation measures knowing that. And the reason that I asked about the grading permit, I wasn't trying to jump out of subject, is it's always seemed odd to me, but there's some building departments that actually issue the grading permit, even though engineering takes the action on it. Building is the central clearinghouse for fire, building, planning, everybody. So I didn't think you did that here, but I wanted to check. So this was a great information session.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Thank you, Chair. So one is sort of informational. We have the existing project that's still, I believe it's been delayed, that's still happening in our downtown here with the Starbucks Chipotle gas station just across the street. I believe those EV stations are only level 2. As it's still in construction, there was talk over a year ago about those. I know it was mentioned at a Chamber of Commerce meeting with Ann that it was mentioned that maybe they would be going up to a 3. Not sure what's going on with that. Do we know where those stand since it's been delayed? Level 2 charging stations, by the time that's done, they're already in a way very obsolete.
To answer that question directly is they only have to install what was approved on that plan during that code cycle.
Okay.
If they want to upgrade it, they would actually have to come back through
Right.
and propose,
So we'll have a lot of charging stations there, but they're only going to be very slow in level 2. All right. Then my next one is I love all the changes that you guys are doing. It's just remarkable. From my experience with the city 5 years ago and to now, you guys are just like, blue ribbon winners. It's amazing. But I'm always looking for forward progress and other types of developments that we could do, other types of building, other types of things that are approved by California highest standards and all that type of stuff. Our type of construction, again, these are my opinions, is really unsustainable. The way we're building and the way we build in 120-degree temperatures isn't such a great idea. There's all types of other structures that are becoming increasingly popular, especially with price problems in standard construction. So there's Adobe, Super Adobe, there's Earthcrete or Aircrete, there's Cobb houses, there's all these other types of constructions that are much more durable, sustainable, and energy efficient for desert environments. You have this great system that's being done, boom, inspection, triggers another inspection, triggers another inspection. Is there anything in your mind as far as future for coming up with that idea, like, well, all right, we want to be ready. Somebody wants to put a Boxable in, or somebody wants to put Aircrete or a Super Adobe or something of that sort. Is it preparation on your end to be ready for that?
To answer your question directly, yes, it is.
Great.
Luckily, the code actually is some people look at the code like it's been there for 40, 50 years and it hasn't changed. California, it couldn't be further from the truth. It's constantly evolving. That's the one thing that I like about the California code is it's evolving with energy standards, efficiency of the actual building itself, residential or commercial. They have not gotten to the point where they're addressing alternative methods for the way it's constructed on the exterior walls. You were talking about Adobe, Super Adobe. Aircrete, that is it's coming up a little bit, but it is, I know the cost of that is.
I just love that you actually know what it is, so.
No,
That's awesome.
I've seen it a couple times, whether it's in videos or.
In the San Diego area, they're doing some really cool things with construction in a lot of the outlying areas, because it's fire resistant, it's super strong, it's super light, it's easy to work with. You could actually cut it with a straw. It's harder than concrete, right? This type of thing is just interesting. So to have that awareness, like if I came to you next week and I said I bought a piece of land and I want to build an Aircrete house, you would be ready to deal with me?
We could deal with that. What I would say is I would flip that script and is finding someone that is willing to work with it or is at least certified to actually build that product. That's the other side of that argument, at least. Yeah.
Right, all right, great. Thank you.
So thank you again for spending the last hour with us and answering all our questions. It was a very good discussion and presentation, and I really liked Commissioner Mead's idea if we could get Deanna Pressgrove to give us a page in that twice yearly booklet that comes out. That would be great because, I know people that have installed things and just didn't know. Like, one of the things you're supposed to get a permit for is if you replace a commode, and people, I think, often do that.
I didn't know that.
People do it all the time, but you're supposed to get a permit for it. And so I think that would be a good way of providing some additional education, because I think people actually read those, even though it's a booklet. It's like it's colorful and people see it, and I page through it all the time, and so if she's willing,
We'll look into that, definitely.
that would be great. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So our next item is discussion of public noticing requirements and possible changes to the zoning ordinance. We have a report from staff.
Yes, good evening, Commission. So this is a follow-up discussion from our March 5th meeting. And at that meeting, we did talk about expanding our public notification requirements. And at that meeting, we talked about why the discussion started. Came from Commissioner Mead, asking that we consider expanding our notification efforts to include residents that may live in apartment complexes or business owners, not the real property owners that typically get the notice, but not the occupants. And so we talked about that. We talked about state law requirements, which does require direct mailing to real property owners within a 300-foot radius. That's the minimum standard, and that's what the city has met. And then also that there is the opportunity for local jurisdictions to expand that. And so we had a discussion last time. And at that discussion, we also had a comparison of other cities. I'm not going to go into this, other than to say that there is some cities that do have expanded notification. Excuse me, sure. Some have expanded notification requirements, some require signs, some require community meeting, and so there is a variation, but we do see that many jurisdictions have increased their mailing radiuses to at least 500 feet. So what we talked about last time is we talked about expanding the notification requirements based on projects. The size of project, increasing a base minimum 500-foot radius. We would notify all property owners. Consideration of maybe increasing that to 1,000 feet for sites of 5 acres. There was also some information that some of our larger projects, such as the Wren and Rosemont and such, were on 10 acres or more. And this is a graphic that our IT department helped us with. Just showed the color-coded the boundaries of what 300 gets you, 500, and 1,000. We also talked about expanded notification to non-property owners, owners within homes of mobile home parks or maybe an RV park, tenants of commercial spaces, tenants of commercial spaces, and residents in apartment complexes. This particular notification had commercial spaces nearby within that radius. They had residents in an apartment complex. They had a mobile home next door to it. So the discussion we had is not only real property owners, but the occupants would also get some notification. We talked about neighborhood outreach. It would be a community meeting that of those interested parties that would get a notice, a mailed notice based on whatever our expanded notification standard becomes. It would be developer-led to identify issues and allow the community to understand what the project is and express what their concerns may be, or maybe they don't have concerns, maybe they are positive about the project, but it's intended to vet projects before they get to hearing, allow that exchange of communication, allow the developer the opportunity to address those issues that can be addressed, and then there's a notice that, report that comes back to the city that indicates what were the issues, what was the notice, sign-in sheet, who participated. So there would be also procedures for those projects. And we also talked about what that threshold would be to require the community engagement process. Then we talked about posting of signs, how many, where. Was it just one? Is it more than one? Does the parcel size matter when we look at these different types of signs? So these are all things we talked about. In the packet, the report that was provided to the commission, the language that would be in a draft ordinance included all these provisions, but I did want to discuss them a little bit more as staff went back and looked at these items and did a little bit more analysis of what the requirements would be for applicants and what the requirements would be for the city to ensure compliance. We had a little bit recommended changes that the commission could consider. Ultimately, I do want the commission to know that it's up to the commission to determine what those standards would be, and we would, of course, incorporate all those changes into an ordinance that would move forward. The other attachment that was provided identified all the other sections in the municipal code that touched upon public noticing, and so we would revise those to be consistent with the ultimate ordinance that gets adopted. So really, when we discussed this last time, we talked about all these different approaches or avenues or enhanced notice that we could require. But there was also discussion about how do we balance that? What's going to be the most effective manner to get the word out to the interested parties? And let's balance that out. So we did talk about, at a minimum, the mailing radius should be 500 feet. That was an agreed upon point. We also all agreed that we should expand it to non-owner persons, persons that live in apartments, condominiums, rentals, businesses. So that was agreed upon. We also talked about the increased radius. We talked about if it's 10 acres or more, maybe it should be 1,000 feet, but we said when we look at the community engagement process, we look at these other processes, maybe 1,000 feet doesn't make sense. Let's balance that out as well. And so we also looked at the posting of signs. I engaged our Public Works Department to find out what would a sign cost. And it's about just under $1,000 for a sign. More signs are required, then that price would increase. And so perhaps that's what staff is suggesting, is perhaps that may not be something that's required given all the other changes that we're proposing. I would add that, like Palm Desert, they made changes to their notification efforts and they added the sign posting requirement, but they have the experience of all these other notification standards to assess and then determine that for them, they also wanted to do the posting requirements. And so I would suggest that we consider delaying or deferring for further discussion posting requirements. And as we go through this code update, perhaps we now have a history of how this expanded notification process is working, and then decide or determine at that time maybe if we should add the sign posting requirements. But at this particular time, staff would recommend that we defer or delay that particular aspect. But we are recommending, this table shows what the discussion was back on March 5th and what we're proposing based on our revised staff report. But again, this is a discussion and we do want to get the commission's input of how we draft the final document that goes forward through the amendment process. So again, 500 feet for all project sites would be the radius. We would increase it to perhaps 750 feet for sites of 10 acres or more. The commission may decide yes, or maybe just leave it at 500. The notice, we're not making any recommended changes. We would provide the notice as indicated. On the neighborhood outreach, we would require that on sites greater than 5 acres, but the director has the discretion to require community outreach for any other discretionary project based on the director's discretion. I would say, though, that on March 5th, we talked about a 10-acre site because the Rand, Rosemont, those are all 10 acres. And so the 5 acres is what's being recommended here, but we could look at 10 acres. And then also, for now, not move forward with on-site public hearing signs. One more slide, Chair Malikoff. So I did get questions from Chair Malikoff, kind of a couple of things. And so I wanted to kind of talk about these a little bit because I think they do have bearing on the discussion that's going to be had. With regard to the sign posting, we talked about, maybe if we were to move forward with that provision, if maybe the sign's vandalized and so it needs to be fixed or repaired, maybe wind affected it, what would be the timing of that? And so if we did look at this provision, I would say, no more than 24 to 48 hours. But if it wasn't done in time for the public hearing, would that delay the hearing? And I would suggest that perhaps no, because this is a supplemental noticing effort. But if the sign had incorrect information that was materially, significant, maybe it had the wrong hearing date for whatever reason, or some other significant aspect that gave folks the wrong information, then I think at that point, maybe we would consider continuing it. That's if we were to move forward with that. And then as far as the community meeting, there was a question about the timing of requiring the community meeting, before submittal or the timing of after submittal. And I'll let Chair Malikoff go into that some more. But the intention was that the applicant would have the opportunity to vet the project with the community and address what could be addressed, and that they agree should be addressed prior to plans coming into the city. The way the ordinance is being drafted is that between the time of it coming into the city, and let's say it's 2 months, 3 months later, and it's getting ready to go to hearing, if there are really substantial changes between the original submittal and any revised plans, then the director would have the discretion to require a second community engagement meeting. And then the question about coordination with staff, yes, there would be coordination throughout the process. And Chair Malakoff, that might not have been the gist of that particular question, but as you all provide your input, maybe we can clarify that too, so make sure we understand and respond to your question correctly. So, and that's...
Thank you. I'm going to, it's unusual, but I'm going to go first because I'm ready to explode. In a good way. So are the on-site signage, you're not requiring it?
Well,
At this point to the council?
well, I'm suggesting to the commission that with all the other efforts that we are discussing to implement, that it may not be it may not be needed at this particular time, and maybe we look at it at a later date.
I think that's a great idea, and let me say I'm all for bringing more people in, notifying more people, but given the cost of these signs, and they're really hard to read, because like you're driving down Ramon Road, you see notice of public hearing, it's not like you can pull over and look at it. You can't circle back and park on Ramon Road and look at it. So you if you really want to read the details, you're going to have to park and then walk and either take a picture of it and think about it, or but they're just very hard to read, and I think they add to the street clutter. I just don't think they're all that helpful compared to increasing your radius and notifying non-owners and businesses. So I'm glad that you're not including that for now. The installation cost, did the $1,000 include the fabrication of the sign was $1,000. Did that include the posts and the installation and the removal?
So it included everything but the installation.
Okay. And that's an increased cost to people when they're trying to do business in Cathedral City. And I just think that the overall benefit doesn't meet the criteria of the cost. So that was my strongest issue. Then when you're notifying the people within the 500-foot radius for the homeowners associations, are you going to notify each owner in the HOA or just the management company?
No, we would propose to notify all occupants of real property. So that would be, the property owner and the occupant if it's not owner occupied.
Yeah, no, that's good, because not every homeowners association, they're like going to put it on a bulletin board or something that nobody might see, and then like where I live, it's 68 units, and I'm just not sure. I know when other public hearing notices were received by the city, the only reason that they got circulated is because I said something. And I think that happens a lot, so I'm glad that, when you do the tax rolls, each of those units in a condominium association do show up on the tax rolls. So I'm glad that they'll get notified too. Then for the community meeting, I think you kind of answered my question. No, you did. I liked your answer. So for community meetings, I was like, boy, that's early in the process. But then the more I thought about it, it's like the project can change over time. But I think if they do it early in the process, after their initial submittal, and they get the feedback from the city on what they think is good and what they think isn't, then they work with the city and they modify the project. And then if like things change and buildings change orientations, and it's something very different, then the director can say, you know, it might be a good idea for you to have another community meeting, just for them to see all the things you did. And that could be to their benefit, because otherwise people aren't going to know. They might show up and be ready to rumble, and all of their concerns were addressed. And they have no other way of knowing that other than if they don't have another meeting. So I like the idea of not making it mandatory to have a second meeting, but leaving it up to the director if there's substantial changes. If there's no substantial changes, then there's no reason to have a meeting, and people can come and object to the project as they saw it. So I like that. And then the last thing I had, and then we can move on, is I've noticed that when people come to the community meeting, sometimes they're just outside the radius, or they're not going to get notified. Well, they didn't get notified because they're not the property owner and it's their mother or something like that. So if they're just outside the radius, I think that the person conducting the meeting, which is always going to be the applicant, that they should make a list of people that want to be notified and then give that to the city, so that those people that have another reason to want to be notified that just don't fit into the category can be notified. So I don't know that I saw that somewhere in the ordinance, but I think that should be part of it, because just like if somebody were to call the city clerk and say, I want to be notified.
So I'll have to go back and look at it more closely, but I believe I wrote in there that the notification had to be provided to those that would have received public hearing notices. So it would be owners and occupants within that radius. The other thing I just wanted to, just as informational. So probably for the last year and a half, since Andy came in as our new director, the city has been generating those mailing lists so that our GIS department will get all that property owner information. I've already spoken to them, so they know that they would then be pulling non-owner occupied information, business license information, getting the mailing addresses for persons in apartment complexes. So we've been having those discussions, and so perhaps it's a matter of looking at our proposed language and basically creating that list that needs to get that mailing list and providing that to the applicant so that we ensure that we're hitting all the people that our ordinance talks about.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to do it is at the community outreach. There are going to be people that didn't receive the notice, and then just ask, if somebody didn't receive the notice, please sign this register with your name and address, and then they turn that over to the city, and then those people can be notified so that they're included for, even though they might be outside the radius. But this is a great step forward, and I don't know why I'm so excited about you not doing the on-site signs, but I am, and I don't know why. But let's go on to somebody else. Commissioner McPhail.
Okay. First, thanks very much for showing us the strike-throughs in Chapter 9.05, so we see what's being replaced and what's new, so yay. I was just wondering, how do we identify residents who are not owners? What data sources are we using to identify someone who's renting a property?
So when you look up the ownership information, you also get mailing addresses. So if the mailing address is not in Cathedral City, you know it's not owner occupied.
Yeah, makes sense. You also mentioned, I think you would notify through publication in a general circulation newspaper. Which one do we use for those sorts of things?
We use the Desert Sun.
Desert Sun, yeah, I thought so. Community engagement. Yeah, so we're going to go through, I think, a really great process of the applicant conducting these meetings, and you get feedback, and you will get a report of how those meetings went and what came up. Those reports will be part of what we would see at the end of the process as well, so we would see that too.
Correct.
Great. Let's see. And then just, I guess my last question is to do with, this is a discussion, and I saw that later on in our agenda, in I think the staff comments section, 5/21, May 21st, it will come back to us and we will actually take some kind of a vote, and then does it go to City Council after? That's running what the process is.
Yes, thank you for asking that, Commissioner McPhail. So yes, based on the direction we received today, I believe we'd be ready to move forward with the ordinance for the Planning Commission. So the Planning Commission would consider the ordinance and make a recommendation to the City Council. Then it would go to the City Council for introduction, and then it goes to a second meeting for adoption.
Great.
Yeah.
And I think I concur with the chair regarding the signage. I think my gut reaction is, oh, it's nice to have signs to see them. Like when I drive by some nice new developments in Palm Springs where these fabulous new houses are building, that great signs to look at. But the reality is, most people are not stopping to look at these signs. And I think the increased notification that we're doing kind of negates the need for them. So thanks very much.
Commissioner Mead.
Yeah, I think I agree with pretty much all the other comments, and I agree that the signs, I like your idea of seeing how the additional notification goes, and then it could always be something that's introduced later. But we don't require any sort of, like, let's say a restaurant applies for a liquor license, there's not even that just like white piece of paper that goes up on the outside that says?
So the city doesn't require it, the state ABC department requires it.
Okay, because I was like, I know I've seen those. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with the 750 for the projects of 10 acres or more, just because I think something of that mass is going to create more traffic with a broader, wider impact, potentially changes in noise or things like that. And I like the community meetings. I think the way you've structured that is perfect. And I'm really excited about bringing more people into the process. And I did want to ask, though, a question about him. HOAs, wouldn't the individual condo owners get notified now because they're homeowners? I always did in LA.
So if you're a condominium owner, yes, you'll get the notice. But if you're not
renter.
the owner, yeah, you won't get it. You will get it now with our changes, but previously, if it was just the owner, you wouldn't get it.
But if you're an owner-occupied condo, you would get notified by default prior to these changes, right?
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, because I thought that was the case. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lee.
I was going to
Commissioner Lee, excuse me.
whatever. I was going to say, I think we should keep the signs, but I don't want the chair to explode. So, no, I think that's fine, delaying that and thinking about it later. On the notification, that seems to be one thing that we're talking about here. But I noted, first of all, you say that they should notify by first-class mail, and they're going to be 10 or 20 days out from the meeting. Are we putting an extra cost on the developer in doing that? I mean, can they notify in other ways?
So the law requires that mailed notice by first-class mail, so that is a requirement, and we do recoup those costs.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other point is the one Commissioner Mead was also talking about. In the draft or under Section E, paragraph 3, it says that they get that mailing list. It says they shall, so it's enforcing. The mailing list shall be obtained by the applicant and based on the most recent property tax assessment rolls of the Riverside County Assessor's Office, which implies that only the owner would get notification. So I think we need some other wording.
So I'll take a look at that. Again, because we have records, right? We have who the business owners are. If it's in a commercial area that's getting noticed, we have a lot of that we have that information. And so I'll take a look at it. Might make sense that we provide that to them.
Yeah, I just don't know how you get from the assessor's records to the renters
Correct.
in rental accommodation.
Yeah.
So if you're saying they shall make the mailing list from the assessor's records, they can't reach the renters.
Yeah. So renters, I think, again, I understand what you're saying. I think renters is a little bit simpler, but it's the business owners and maybe within mobile home parks, the occupants of those parks. But let me go back and look at that and see
Yeah.
how to massage
If
the
we can
language.
figure out how,
Yeah.
how to make sure they do include the renters,
Sure.
because we want them to.
Yes.
Doesn't the parcel diagram tell you how many units are in the building and then give you I know, like with I thought that was somewhere, maybe it's in the title or something, where it tells you all the unit numbers, because all you would need is the list of unit numbers, and then you just send a tenant or a resident, right?
It doesn't say.
You don't
the
need to
unit-
know that.
It doesn't say the unit numbers. What it says is like, if you're unit 56, then you'll have an APN number that'll be like 0170-66-54.
No, but you're talking about a condo, I'm talking about an apartment building.
So apartment
Yeah.
building won't have renter information. However, we can get that information, find out how many units there are, what the addresses are. We have ways to, even if it's just calling the apartment complex and finding it out, but we'll figure that
Okay.
part out. We'll come back and report on that
Okay.
when we return.
There's got to be a publicly available database of that, because
Yep.
people get stuff addressed to resident all the time from
Correct.
even the electric company and all those things.
That's
But
true.
I do think, though, that the ordinance somewhere says that the renters do need to be notified, as well as the businesses. But I think my answers changed a little bit after Commissioner Mead with, for an apartment building. But like, if the owner of 4563 Cascade Court, and they live in San Diego, they're going to get the notice. But then you can just mail 4563 Cascade Court, and then you don't have to put a name on it. You can just put occupant, and then they'll get that. And then that's how the renters would get that for the lots of record. But for the apartments, there's going to have to be more research.
And as they say in the Senate, I reclaim my time. The only other thing I noted was thank you also for the state legislature, the copy of the code, but that does make a mention somewhere, 65091 in paragraph 4 of that. It says if there are more than 1,000 people affected, then they can just do the notification in lieu. Or,
Yes, if it's more than 1,000 property owners, you can put a quarter page ad
Right.
instead. Mhm.
So will that still apply to this? So if there are more than 1,000 people in our area, that would still apply?
Yes, and we'll take a look at that closely as well.
All right, good. I wanted to go, yay, because one of the things I hate about code in general is when things are duplicated throughout when they should be in one place. And so I loved all those deletions of the instructions for how to notify meetings, and it just says refer to 909, and I love that. So that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Commissioner Bedard.
Thank you for doing this. I think it's really great. I love where it's going. I love everything that you guys have done. I have one exception, and I don't want you to explode. I'm on the fence about the signs. I guess, one of those people, unlike the rest of the commissioners, that I actually would find a place to park and go out and look at a sign and take a picture and go to the website. Or I did that on the projects in my neighborhood for projects on the other side of town from me. I would be curious about that, and if I'm not notified, I'd be even more curious to know what's going on there. So signs, to me, I'm on the fence. I understand the rationale for them and the cost. I really like them. I have a lot of experience as a community organizer for almost 20 years, and community meetings were very, very, I think it was reflected by a previous commissioner in this as well, that community meetings are not well attended in general. And the only reason when they do become well attended is because somebody's angry about something and tells all their neighbors, and then the neighbors show up. So having a sign, although I love the commission, I love the meetings, I love the having to do that, I doubt the turnout is going to be very productive at those types of meetings, just based on experience. Hopefully that will change and people will engage more in our community. But signs is a way to actually get that information out there, even to the entire city, not just the neighbors affected. And to a lot of people don't read their mail. It goes into the recycling bin, and the sign makes up for that non-attendance. So I'm just curious, I don't know how to evaluate. Like you had said, like, what's your return, what's your return on the investment on a sign? I don't know how to evaluate that. How would you evaluate, how could you calculate how many people walked on the sidewalk or pulled over and took a picture and went to the website or something of that sort? As far as the information on the sign, the date of the meeting would be great. If the meeting's moved, maybe there's a URL on there, a QR code that takes you to a project page on the city website that you could then go to and check out. I'm not sure how to handle that. That's my only feedback.
Well,
What if we split the difference and we did something more like what the ABC requires, which is more of just a printout, like the hearing notification that gets, that we get, like just gets printed out and just put on?
I think the
There's
challenge
no
you may
cost
have with something that simple is when you're dealing with a vacant site, an undeveloped
right,
site. You have wind, you have environmental conditions.
Yeah.
They don't stay up.
Rain.
I was thinking more of a project that was already more remodel. Yeah, you're right. Forget that, scratch it. I mean, I tend to agree with you. I like the idea of the signs, because in LA, I think it makes more sense. People are walking around. I think here, I could see maybe in 10 years.
I pull over. I purposely go look at them.
Well, I think, looking along this bench here, we're a bunch of strange people who would probably all pull over and find out what the sign said.
Well, what do they say with mailings, right? If somebody mails a complaint letter, that one complaint letter counts for at least 50 other people or something like that. So
The fact is, you can lead the horse to water. Yeah,
Right.
There are people who throw the mail away are going to also ignore the sign.
Exactly.
So I think
go to
this
the meeting.
is a good compromise. Let's do it this way, and then if we feel we need to later, we can add the signage.
I also do pull over, even though,
See?
but.
no, you don't like it.
Even though but what I do that's even stranger is every morning, how some people read the obituaries, I read the legal ads for the area, and I see what all the public hearing notices and what they look like for all of the jurisdictions. And if I don't do that first thing in the morning, my day's just not right. But thank you very much. This was a very interesting discussion. I know that a lot of people wouldn't find it interesting. I do, and I think all of us did. And thank you for the work you put into it, and we look forward to it. Let's move on to. I just have to take a breath.
Commissioners' reports.
No.
Oh, sorry, yes. Go ahead. That's right.
The
We went
discussion on accessory shade structures. I knew it, I just couldn't find it.
right.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. I apologize that I was late to your meeting. It's been one of those days, and I am seeing this presentation for the first time as you are. So this is going to be an ad-lib presentation, and I apologize for that. So I am not Cynthia Schultz. Cynthia did write the staff report. She did an exemplary job on that, and unfortunately, she could not be here this evening. So your staff report walks through several concepts. Really, we have the R1 zoning district listed as a prototypical zoning district for residential properties in the city. We talk about setbacks for primary structures and the building envelope. So your primary structure in an R1 zoning district, this could very well be the principal residence along with an attached garage. And then it steps into accessory structure setbacks. So an accessory structure, that could be a detached garage, it could be a carport. Really, it is open on 3 or more sides. That accessory structure can encroach into the side and the rear setback. That can be 5 feet from the side or the rear, but it may not be located within the front yard setback. So on this slide, we have your prototypical a building envelope for a primary structure in an R1 zone district with a 10-foot side setback on one side, 5-foot side setback on the other, and a 15-foot rear setback. And then that accessory structure setback can be 5 feet on the side and the rear, not encroaching into the front. It then discusses temporary structures. And temporary structures are intended to be up for a period of time of 90 days or less. And really the reasons for that, these are not designed to be permanent. The materials, they're typically lower quality. It's not something that is durable. We'll get into some of the issues or the challenges there, but temporary structures can be up for a period of 90 days or less. They are permitted essentially the same way as an accessory structure, so they can be in a side or a rear yard up to 5 feet from the property line. They may not be located within the front yard. So as we assessed and evaluated the notion of, say, a covered parking space. If this were a detached garage, if this were a carport, that is something that could readily be permitted, looking at our accessory structure setbacks. Now, we took a look at temporary shade structures, and we have some examples here that I'll show you. That is not something that we would currently permit today. We would allow temporary shade structures in a backyard, let's say for an event, or if someone had reason to shade their backyard over the summer, that's something that we would permit, but we wouldn't be inclined to support that today for covered vehicle parking. So to give you some examples, these are examples that we found on the internet today, just looking at examples of what say a pop-up or a temporary shade structure would look like. And some of the challenges that we have with these are the durability of the materials. These are not designed to be up year-round. The material is typically lower quality. It degrades in the sun. These structures have a tendency to blow and they become projectiles. And when they're left up for longer periods of time, they can affect the aesthetic within a neighborhood, as well as create long-term code compliance issues. That's something I've seen over the course of my career, and as staff, we would not permit these or advise that we permit these. But to give you some examples of what could be permitted in the code, these are attached, detached structures that would be allowed as an accessory structure in our code up to that 5-foot side or rear setback. And I believe those are the slides that we have for you, so I will get out of the way and enable this for discussion with the commission, and I'll happily answer any questions that you may have.
Commissioner Bedard, I know this is an area of interest for you, so why don't you go first?
Thank you. Yeah, so this is basically explaining what is in existence, correct? It's not what...
This is the code as it stands today.
Right.
And I think the professional staff is saying we would not, as a professional staff, advise that we permit temporary structures for covered parking on a permanent basis. And we as well would not advise that we permit those in the front yard. These can be permitted in the side or the rear yard.
So this, I totally get it. It doesn't solve the problem. One of the issues that I brought up and why I brought up this was the equality, equanimity type of issue, that people who do not have garages, do not have those types of spaces, do not have sun coverage or shade coverage, anything like that. I'm hoping that we could have a more flexible response, or at least something that people could do instead of just nothing, because I appreciate providing shade in the backyard, but even the images that you show on the last side appear to be front buildings, structures that are on the front of a house. So if a house is built to the property, I forget what would be the setback, if it's built to that setback, how do people then provide shade? Wealthy people are adding structures, building things, have garages, or putting air conditioning in their garages, or doing all those types of things. Your average person, how are they getting shade on their vehicle? And it's becoming more and more of a problem. I appreciate that, okay, now we could do things in the backyard, but that doesn't solve the problem. And I'm hearing that there is no solution.
We are not presenting a solution tonight. We're presenting a
Just what exists.
summary of the code as it stands today and our professional recommendation. And this is my experience, 20-plus years in local government. I
Okay.
have years of experience in code compliance. The temporary structures that we see here become problematic.
Absolutely, and I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, they do become problematic. Yes, and I'm just curious, like, you know my neighborhood, I think, quite well. A lot of the homes in my neighborhood don't have parking. So they have a driveway, but they don't have covered. Now, at least 25 to 30% of those homes actually have a shade structure, but that was built previously before the code excluded it. So there's quite a few of these last slide structures that are in my neighborhood, quite a few that were permitted, and they're there, and they don't disrupt the visual quality of the neighborhood. At least I don't think they do. I think in many ways, some of them have done so well that they enhance the property and the homes. So, but they're now not legal. So let's say, I'll just use myself as the example. I've kind of solved my problem, but my neighbor next door has this beautiful carport, sort of like the one in the top right corner, that was built onto the structure. Did it completely legally, permits, all of that kind of stuff. Now they don't have the capability. If I wanted to do that, there's already precedent for it, but I can't because it doesn't qualify under the legal definition like what you're saying right now.
Right,
It was at
because
one time.
The R1 zone district today has a 20-foot front setback. So you could build a shade structure, a permanent shade structure. You could build that in the
I
front
have
yard.
2 feet in
if-
my
if
particular
you-
yard.
If you met the 20-foot
Right.
setback
So
requirement.
I could put a shade structure on that would be 2 feet. That's what I would be allowed to under today's code.
Under today's code. Now, keep in mind, you are going through a zoning code update, so if you want to modify that 20-foot front yard setback, you could do that through the zoning code update if that were a policy decision that you wanted to advance.
Well, I invite our 2 representatives on that to take that up. Again, I really
Can I
think.
ask you a question? How would you be envisioning someone putting up, because it seems like the last slide that you showed gives people a lot of options. So if they don't have I guess what you're saying is if they don't have a driveway.
No, they have a driveway, but they don't meet the setback requirements. So I'll just use myself for an example. I think I've solved my problem, but I have a driveway and my house is 22 feet to the curb. So I only have a space that I could add, let's say, a shade structure that's 2 feet.
You couldn't put a carport essentially in your driveway because it would be too close to the street.
Because it would be too close to the street.
Okay.
Now, like I said, there are quite a lot, at least a third, if not more, of the houses in my neighborhood actually have these structures that actually exist. I believe several of them, if not, I don't know how to say that. Some may be permitted, some may not be. I know my neighbor's is permitted. Again, these houses were built in the 1950s and 60s, so they went through a different requirement, right? And there's already a precedent in the neighborhood for that.
So I guess I just want to confirm, what you're saying is you're looking for a way to allow a permanent shade structure in an existing driveway
Correct.
that may be closer to, that may not have the big enough setback. You're not talking about building a shade structure like in the middle of someone's front yard.
No.
Okay,
No.
That's all I wanted.
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure if all these, when you were talking about these homes, if you're talking about always homes that have a driveway, or if you're talking about homes that don't have either.
No,
You think some of
these
them don't have
particular
parking?
style of homes all have driveways. They may not have garages. Again, the garages were originally, in my development, were actually originally carports. The carport, there's not one carport in my neighborhood. They were converted to garages, so they were closed off. And then, like in my example, my house was built in 1961. The original owners actually pulled permits and turned the garage into a living space from the beginning in its occupancy, right? So, and I know that because I found a permit that referenced to it, but we also knew the people that we bought the house from, right? It was a long-standing neighborhood. The people lived there for very many years, right? So that type of thing, and there's already precedent. So I'm curious, there's quite a lot of existing structures, but if I did it maybe 15 years ago, it would have been fine. Now, not so much. I don't know if there's flexibility that could be built in for that, right? Like in legal stance, we say, well, is there precedent for that? I know they use that in architectural review. Oh, there's precedent for this height. There's precedent for this type of thing that establishes it. When I lived in the historic zone and we were doing a new structure, there was precedent for a particular type of development, even though it wasn't quite all by code. We were able to work with that. There was a flexibility in doing that because of the precedent of the type of neighborhood that was already there, right?
Can I just ask you a question, right? So obviously there's going to be zoning code update, but if the city were to change and say, okay, you could have a carport that was closer to the street than the existing setback. As you said, people originally on your street had carports, and then they closed them into garages, right? And then some of those garages get converted to living space. So how would we, if we allow people to now build, let's say, to within 5 feet of the street, what's to stop them from then enclosing that into a garage and then turning it into building space?
Right.
And now you have houses that just literally, and then we're stuck in the same spot where then you buy that house and you still don't have a place to put your car with.
Well, it would be about determining the actual shade structure as a shade structure, not a living space. And again, the reason why those things happened was because we were county.
Right. I'm
And then
asking him
yeah.
in terms of, could that be somehow written in that then there's absolutely no ability to convert it?
We can write anything you want on the code. I'll start with that. But I want to put this graphic back up on the slide. And I know the state has done a lot to undermine single-family zoning. Single-family zoning
Right.
doesn't exist the way that it once existed. But setbacks were built in order to create a building form within residential neighborhoods. And, this was intended to, just maintain that density, to limit the bulk and mass within neighborhoods, and to give it a certain visual aesthetic. So you had setbacks from adjacent properties, you had setbacks from the street. There was a certain visual appeal about having front yard landscaping and, more open space within that neighborhood. And I know this is, more of that post-World War II concept, and it's radically changed, but that front setback was put into the code for a reason. And I know with ADUs, we've seen vast changes with single-family zoning, and setback requirements, and ADUs can go just about anywhere on a property today. We now have urban lot splits and two-family dwelling units, and maybe this is immaterial. Maybe this doesn't matter anymore. But I would go back to this graphic and say, there was a reason why we created building envelopes. There was a reason why these standards existed. And yes, people chose to do the things that they did in the past to convert carports into garages, into living spaces. Not every property has development potential. Some are maxed out, and maybe it's not fair, but I think there is potential on some properties, less potential on others. And
Well, so that's my question. Like, how is that decided? Like, what you're talking about this post-war aesthetic, which I don't like, but I understand that there is a desire for it.
that's
Now,
how the community was formed. I think that's how a
Sure.
lot of communities were formed.
well, back in the day, 50, 60 plus years ago when it was actually built, but the community changed all of that. Like I said, at least a third, if not more, of the structures in this particular neighborhood have built these carports. So the idea of maintaining aesthetic, 60 years ago, that was changed. So, or over the many years, that aesthetic has evolved, and it doesn't have that. It's not like it's in a historic overlay zone and you can only design this way or that way. There weren't these overlays or designs requirements, right? If you go back again to that last slide, the house, if you can imagine those houses, are all ranch houses, and that one particularly on the right, on the top right, like that shows how my neighborhood looks now. If you got rid of, or at least a large portion of the neighborhood, if you got rid of that carport, that's how it was built. But the neighborhood doesn't fit that post-war aesthetic anymore. And that post-war aesthetic after that had been dropped for decades until at some point the city came back and said, oh, we're going back to that preservational type of post-war aesthetic.
I don't know how those particular houses, how those carports would have been permitted. I would say that the 20-foot setback we have in the R1 zone, that likely goes back to early 90s, late 80s. There is not a provision in the code today that would allow someone to lawfully permit a structure in the front yard. I don't know how that's happened in
Then
the last 30 years.
apparently all of the structures in my neighborhood are illegal, which maybe is the case. I know my neighbor did it with a legal permit. I mean, she did a whole thing. Her mother did it. Her mother was the original owner of the house, and so this was back in the 1950s. So she did it legally, I know, at that time, and it was beautifully done. I'm just saying that I wonder if there's a way, and I know it's hard to do things neighborhood by neighborhood or development by development. I know that that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It creates problems at times. And if a permitting rule doesn't match, right? Like if houses at one time in a development were only built, I'm just hypothetical, were built 4 feet away from the property line, but now they have to be 5 feet. Does that mean we have to go in, when somebody applies for a permit to do something on their house, they have to then take out that wall, move their wall back? So I'm just saying that that rule that then overlies the entire city doesn't or can't even apply for that particular house that was built that way originally.
It would be considered legal nonconforming. We wouldn't make them take it down, but if it was damaged, destroyed, typically it's a 50% threshold. They came back and they wanted to rebuild it. If it were damaged or destroyed, 50% or more, we would say, no, you have to build it or rebuild it to the current standards.
Again,
But
I think
until
I've
then, it'd
solved
be
my
legal
problem.
nonconforming.
And as an equity type of thing, we are not a super wealthy community here in Cathedral City. I love our community. And my friends that live in Rancho Mirage, my friends that live in Palm Springs, they are air conditioning their garages, and they have 3-car garages. The families, especially on the north side of town, I have friends that live over there, and I drive over to the north side, and there are cars baking in the sun. It reduces the value of the car. It makes the car have to have more repairs. It dries out gaskets. It ruins paint jobs. You have to get in a 140-degree car in for 3-4 months out of the summer. There just doesn't seem to be a way to provide an equity.
So for me, I understand this is a personal issue because it's your neighborhood and you want to see a change for that neighborhood.
Oh, no, it's
But no, just listen. So I also understand what Andy's saying, that there is an aesthetic that was developed for the city. We don't just have your neighborhood or other neighborhoods where there's no parking. We have condo complexes which have full-time, all year round living and very little covered parking. We have other locations which have the same problems. But all that design is there right now. And we can certainly consider in the zoning as we move forward if there are changes we want to make in order to improve the character of the city as a whole. We can't, I think, simply apply our individual preferences, because I prefer the style that we have right now, except it drives me crazy sometimes because I can't do much with my 20-foot in front, but sometimes I do want to do something. But even so, I appreciate that it keeps a standard to the character of the city and that neighborhood. So I think you're right that it would be these two commissioners who could consider that in their deliberations on zoning. I don't think we can solve it here.
No, and I'm not asking to. I'm looking at this as a conversation, and I'm not looking to be confrontational in the conversation. And I'm saying, can we do more?
Well, I'm going to jump in. I heard what you said the last time that you brought it up, and I remembered that. And then at the workshop where we were marking up maps and putting in suggestions of what we wanted our consultant to address, I put that in there. how to deal with providing shade structures in non-conforming areas or, for small lots and things. And I think that our consultant, who, I don't know the exact details of the contract, but I think they're pretty knowledgeable and we're paying them a good fee, that it's something that we can definitely explore in the zoning update. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is the answer, but one of the things that I was thinking about was something that we used in Redlands for older homes. It was in the rear yard, and I'm not saying this is the answer, but you could provide some kind of language that says that you could provide a 20-foot, an extension into the front yard, no more than 20 feet within 10 feet of the property line that's open on 3 sides. Now, I don't know if that's going to work, but it kind of addresses your issue. It kind of addresses your issue because it has to remain open on 3 sides.
I didn't have an issue.
Well, no, you said didn't you say you were concerned with them enclosing it?
Well, I just wanted to know how that.
Yeah, that would be a way to address that.
Sure.
So, and I'm not saying that that's an answer, but it's something we can explore as a possible solution as we move forward in the zoning update process.
Cool.
So I assure you, it's not going to be forgotten because I already wrote it down, and I'm going to remember tonight. And it's something that we will address as the larger group when we meet.
Yeah, I know shade structures was a big theme when we were doing those events, by the way. I was at the March 15th one. It was fabulous. And I know shade structures were one of the issues that were coming up in commercial parking spaces, and how important they were. Well, somebody in a commercial parking space is maybe there for a half hour, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And it was so important to so many people to have these shade structures in these commercial lots. But people are parked at their home for much longer periods. So I'm curious about if that is a disconnect or not, if we're...
It's going to be addressed.
Yeah, beautiful, thank you, I appreciate that.
Like I said, I wrote it down on not even on a sticky, I wrote it directly on the map. I was going to, I think we're done with the three of
Yes.
us, and I was going to move on to you.
Okay. So I appreciate what you said about the post-World War II aesthetic. I understand that that's how it started, right? Having big setbacks, friendly neighborhood, you could sit on your porch and you could see down the street, see kids playing and whatnot. But now, and I think to your point about all the laws that the state has passed with ADUs and subdividing lots and all this kind of stuff, the setbacks are getting smaller, the fire risk is getting higher, and I think one of my concerns is always, for setbacks, can emergency personnel get through? Can 2 guys in full fire gear get a gurney through a setback? Because if you have a fire, especially in a 2-story building, they may have to get a ladder in there to get someone out. And the smaller the setbacks you have, the easier wildfire spreads. The closer the roofs are together, when we're talking about having all these lots with a subdivided 2 homes, now at 4 ADUs, whatever the new law is, and it now is getting us to 8 structures basically on a single family lot. I have a real concern about fire, especially when I have a close friend who lost his entire house and all I got was them and 2 cats and 6 dogs out of their house in Palisades. They have nothing. So I know that originally it was about the aesthetics, but I am concerned about us having people build to the property line and exacerbating what the state is already doing. So I just want to bring that up because I think it has evolved and the environment has evolved over that time. So
I appreciate that. And if we go back 50 years from when the post-World War II boom happened, when you first started seeing zoning laws come into effect, it was public health and safety. It was for light and air, for those basic principles. That's why zoning fundamentally exists. So I think there is a good point there.
The 20-foot was also for greenery, so that as you're driving down the street, you don't just see blocks buildings so that you see, landscaping.
I did want to leave the commission with a positive thought, something to think about here. And this is, to your point, that not all neighborhoods are the same. And, we have a zoning code right now that the R1 is applied broadly across the city, but not all R1 zoned neighborhoods are the same. And this may be something we want to think about as we're going through the zoning code update. Do we change residential zoning? Do we create separate districts, sub-districts? This is something I did in a community in Colorado. We looked at older neighborhoods where we wanted to encourage reinvestment. We wanted to encourage additional development. We wanted to encourage expansions. And the only way to do that was to allow for greater lot coverage, to allow for reduced setbacks. So in that community, they had a residential zone district standard that was for more stable neighborhoods that may have had, lesser lot coverage, greater setbacks. And then for those neighborhoods that were tighter, had smaller lots, that community knew in order to encourage those to be brought up to current standards, they had to do something along those lines to allow the greater lot coverage and the reduced setbacks. So that's a possibility. That's something we can think about. And in that community, as they were going through the zoning code update, they assessed, they looked at every neighborhood, identified its character, and there was a very exhaustive effort. I was part of the team that looked at every parcel of land, 30,000 properties in the city, to figure out how we're going to categorize them. It can be done. And if there is a desire to break down the R1 into separate districts or logical sub-districts to reflect desired intentions or particular character that we see in neighborhoods, it's possible.
Commissioner McPhail.
I don't think I've got anything to add to that closing statement there. I think the route is for you on our task force or whatever it's called, to take the message that you're hearing, and maybe there is some flexibility in blanket R1 zoning to do something for different neighborhoods that have different characteristics. I think that's probably the avenue to go down.
The important thing is it won't be overlooked.
I'd just add, because we actually are seeing a change happening anyway in what we're doing, because Rio Vista Village, I think it was, we, in that special, what's the term? Special...
Specific plan?
Specific plan, that's the word. So I've got his problem now, the words are escaping. But there, we changed setbacks, we changed lot sizes, we did a lot of things there in order to encourage that development. And they wouldn't have 20-foot, they wouldn't have anywhere to park a car, in fact, at the front of those properties. I think it's 5-foot setback or something. Mm-hmm. So, we're doing it piecemeal. I think what we're getting from the zoning code changes is we can incorporate those ideas where we think they should be and not have all these variances and not have to have special plans all the time to change so that somebody can build whatever it is they want. So I'm hoping that that's what's going to come out of this process.
If nobody has anything to add, we'll move on to Commissioner comments. Commissioner Bedard, did you have something?
Yeah, so as you guys know, I think you know, I'm on the board of the Cathedral City Chamber of Commerce. I'm also on the Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce board. Something that keeps coming to me, and this is specifically for permitting of small businesses, I'm not sure how that fits, the dynamics. More than 50% of small businesses are home businesses in the United States. And we have something called the Cottage Food Ordinance, which is a CFO, which is done by the county. So if I was a cake pop maker, I could make cake pops in my home. I could have an employee in my home. I could also have someone come in my home and taste my cake pops if they wanted to get 50 of them or 100 of them for their wedding, right? Now that's the CFO county ordinance, right? And the kitchen has to be certified or whatever. But that's a food-based small business, right? Now, small businesses as a license in the city say you cannot have an employee and you cannot, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you cannot have an employee and you cannot have anybody to come to your home to taste your cake pops. So if I have a CFO license and the CFO license from the county says that I can have somebody, but if I go to the city and I get my city license, the city says you can't. So there's a incongruency that's there. And as I'm reaching, one of my goals is to reach out to more small home-based Hispanic businesses, and that, as we know, is a large portion of our population here, to try and get those businesses more involved in the community, to try and get them more represented and stuff like that. There are hundreds of people that are avoiding being licensed by the city because they don't want anybody to know. And I think the original intention was to keep traffic and stuff like that down. We don't want strangers walking in our neighborhood and stuff of that sort, to have a client come to someone's house. And the number of Amazon, Uber Eats, and drivers that are coming through our neighborhoods far surpasses how many clients that a small business would have at their home. So I'm bringing this up just to say, as we move forward in our rezoning and permitting and that type of stuff, I think it behooves us to get more small businesses licensed. I think it behooves us to actually match CFO requirements to city requirements. And I don't particularly, and maybe people would disagree with me, as a small business person that runs out of my home, I don't understand exactly, like, if I wanted to have a client, all my clients are online, but I have a client that's an emergency client, or a client that's having an anxiety panic attack and they need to see me. I don't want to be out of compliance with the city by inviting them to come to my home and having a private session in my home. So I think, as somebody who's very business on these business task forces, on these business chambers, I am disappointed that the city has that limitation. And I don't know if there's a way to look at that, since we are at this point of review. And it's, for whatever reason, been a hot topic the past month, as I've been going to chambers, especially the Hispanic American chambers. That was it. Thank you.
Anybody else have commissioner comments? Commissioner McPhail.
Report/comment, just I attended the Palm Springs Zoning Code update meeting on April the 1st. Which was like a public meeting. And I just want to say I was quite impressed with how they ran the meeting. Obviously, they're much further down the process than we are. They've got their preliminary rezoning maps. But the format that they ran, I thought, was something to emulate in terms of public meeting, having pretty short presentation by the experts, and instead having experts at board showing people what the proposals are and allowing people to interactively put post-it notes and things on. So there was a good interaction, I think, between the staff and the experts and the members of the public who were there, rather than just a 30-minute presentation. Thank you very much, go away. And also bring food and water. That will get people going as well. Ms. Schultz was also at the meeting, and I think something I'd mentioned to her before that I think I put in some comments. Our website for the zoning code update relative to what Palm Springs has, I think Ms. Schultz was suggesting there's a technical reason maybe why we can't have some of the functionality. If you go to I can't remember, Zone Palm Springs, that's what it's called. There's a lot of material there, information there. It's very interactive, and when you go to our page at the moment, of course we haven't done very much, but it's a very static and dense page with lots of paragraphs, and I hope that as we go on we can make it more accessible to people, a la Palm Springs. So that's me.
Sure.
I just wanted to say about the walking tours, even though besides my husband and myself and Commissioner Lee, there was only one true member of the public there on our walking tour. She had a really good time. She learned a lot. She was very excited about her experience. And it's funny because I went home after that, and then I went to the Stater Brothers and actually ran into her at the Stater Brothers, and she engaged me again for like 10 minutes about how great a time she had, how much she learned. She wished more people would get involved, and she it was one of those things where like, she didn't know what she didn't know, right? She didn't know what zoning was. She didn't know about, all she came because there was a big house going up across the street from her, and that's basically what drove her to come out. But she really learned a lot, and I just thought it was very valuable feedback for you guys that, you know, I think if you can get people there, like, and put it in terms that they understand, like, I almost feel like those walking tours wouldn't be a bad thing to do as an educational tool because it puts it on a level that people can understand. You know, reading a zoning code is boring, but when you're like, look, like, should we allow wooden fences, or do we want to have people have walls, and look at the difference between this wall, which has no landscaping, and this wall, which does. Like, all that's much more engaging to people, and I think they just understand then the importance of why the city has rules and codes and stuff. So anyway, just wanted to pass along that feedback that she really enjoyed it.
I think I met the same lady on the walking tour that I went on. Nothing else. So that would take us to staff comments.
We did have 2 items that we attached under staff comments. One is the future agenda items list, and the other,
I can't hear you.
excuse me, Chairman? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
He said he couldn't hear you.
Oh, under staff comments, we have 2 items. One is the future agenda items list, and the other is the Planning Commission work plan. And so that's being provided every meeting that we meet. If there's any questions or comments, this would be an appropriate time, or email me. Thank you.
We had a conversation about recusal, and I had asked, how do I actually have input as a stakeholder? And I didn't hear about.
Okay, I'll follow up with our city attorney and have Stephanie reach out to you.
Cool,
I
thanks.
apologize for that.
I was in that position a little while ago, and actually was told that because we're volunteers, we exist in 2 realms. So if we're recusing ourselves from an item of discussion, we can still appear as a member of the public for a 3-minute comment.
There's no city attorney here tonight, so no city attorney report. And therefore, at 8:21, I adjourn this meeting of the Planning Commission.
Yay!
Yay.